sometimes difficult to understand how Oregon could become such a active location for the Klan when Oregon's racial populations are so small because of the success of the black exclusion laws in the 19th century. And the answer, of course, is that the Klan was not just interested in racial matters, the Klan was interested in quotes, Americanism.
The Klan in Medford at one time took a man named Thomas Hale out, and because he opposed the Klan, they put a noose around his neck and gently lifted him off the ground. And they also had taken a Negro, one of the few that must have been in Oregon at that time, and made sure that he got out of town.
They were not killed. They were threatened, and there was a court case and a trial that followed, and they would all be acquitted.
But for the Klan in Oregon, the basic thing we always need to point out is that it got very quickly tied with political movements. So it wasn't always a question of just strictly anti-Catholic, but rather it was a maneuvering of various political forces, and whoever wanted to get the votes would have to ally with this, and it was very popular to ally with the Klan versus the Catholic. That was a good vote-getting mechanism.
Those who came out west on the Oregon Trail had many reasons to do so. Many left to leave the harsh climate of Missouri, others to escape the financial depression of the 1820s, and some were caught up in the gold rush of California and sought financial success. The reasons were as varied as the nearly 300,000 people who made the 2,000-mile journey from Missouri to Oregon.
In the early 1840s, Oregon really wasn't an official part of the United States. It was a territory that was being contended for by England and America. And eventually in the middle 1840s, England and America divided the Oregon Territory, creating modern British Columbia, and then later the Oregon Territory as we know it, that becomes the states of Washington and Oregon. So in the early 1840s, when Americans first started to come to Oregon, it really wasn't under the jurisdiction of the American government. So people who held slaves and wanted to come to Oregon were perfectly free to do that.
Characteristic of Oregon was that it was a pioneer state, and it had inherited people who migrated from New England to Illinois and to Oregon. They also brought with them their inherited prejudices about the black and anyone else.
They brought a Southern sympathizer point of view, and some reports claim that there were some slaves accompanying some of those early explorers.
Most of the population that came to Oregon in the 1840s across the trail were working class people. And if you were a person with a working class background, you hated slavery, not because of what it might do to the slave, but because of the competition it means for you in trying to pursue your own livelihood. You know, the thinking went something like, why should a person be willing to pay me a wage or to involve me in some kind of work contract when they could take that same money and buy a slave and work that slave for free for the rest of that slave's life. So a working class person had an almost automatic antipathy to the institution of slavery, not because of what it did to the slave, but because of the competition it represented for free labor in the area. And I would say if you had to look at Oregon's population in the 1840s and early 50s, probably most white immigrants fell into that category of being very hostile to slavery because it was a difficult institution for free labor to compete against. But we know that the American population of Oregon, the Oregon Territory in the early 1840s, was still relatively small itself. even in terms of a white population. So if the white population was very small, then it just stands to reason that any black population would have been much smaller, and the slave part of the black population would have been, again, smaller than that. So it's very unlikely that very many slaves came to Oregon in the 1840s, but it's certainly possible and very likely that some did. So if a person of color lived in an area in which he was well accepted by and interacted in a friendly and a supportive fashion with his nearest neighbors, then they could live in almost any part of Oregon and have a fairly successful experience there. So the most important ingredient in a frontier is how you get along with your neighbors. The question of slavery, of course, was the most heated political question in the country during the years of the Oregon Trail. The 1840s and 50s is the same generation in American life that evolves our Civil War about slavery. So it's entirely likely and quite possible that many of the people who came this far west were doing so trying to seek a place where they wouldn't have to deal with those ongoing heated controversies in the eastern part of the country. The overwhelming political viewpoint that prevailed in Oregon was to try and avoid interracial problems by having an area in which only one race lived. Now, there were a number of problems in implementing that philosophy. One of the problems was Oregon was not a deserted area when Americans began to arrive. Oregon already had a large resident colored population. That would be the Native American population. So if you're going to create an area in which only one race lives, you have to do something about that original residential population. And so the policy was to put them on reservations, to remove them from general society and locate them on special reservations that would exclude them from the normal kind of give and take of general society. Now, once you accomplish that, the other problem is keeping other races from arriving. And Oregon pursued that policy by passing a series of exclusion laws that made it simply illegal for a black person or a Chinese person or a person of a different racial orientation to be a legal resident of Oregon. And so the first law was adopted in 1844. Another law was adopted when Oregon became an official state in 1848, an official territory in 1848. And finally, in the original Oregon Constitution, that was the foundation for its statehood, an article was adopted that made it illegal for a black person to reside in the state of Oregon.
A meeting of the Oregon State Constitutional Convention, which met at the Marion County Courthouse in Salem, resulted in the following proclamation regarding the Negroes in the area.
It's interesting to note that the vote against slavery was a much closer one than a vote against keeping African Americans out of the state.
There were many people in Oregon, for example, and this would be reflected in Oregon public policy, who did not like slavery, but who also did not like blacks. So you had an anti-slavery and an anti-black element of the population. You had some people who didn't like slavery, but were at least tolerant of blacks. And you had some people who were pro-slavery. So you had a whole range of possibilities on the slavery question.
But in the context of the rapid growth in population at that particular time, they were relatively few in number. And many will go to those who come as free persons, are apprehensive of what Oregon's negativism means to them, and so they will go north into what will become soon the territory of Washington.
The Lash Law was the first black exclusion law adopted in Oregon before Oregon became officially a part of the United States. It was a law that was adopted under what was called the provisional government. and the provisional government was the one that passed the first exclusion law. And under that first exclusion law, the punishment for a black person who violated that law, who tried to legally stay here in Oregon, was to be arrested every 6 months and publicly whipped. And that's where the pattern of calling it the lash law, the lashing law, comes from. They were to be whipped every 6 months until they decided to relocate, a minimum of 20 lashes or a maximum of 39 lashes. Now, that law was going to be an exception. Later exclusion laws would not include that lashing, that whipping component, but of course the basic concept was still the same, that blacks were not legally welcome to reside in Oregon. Jacob Vanderpool is a very interesting case in early Oregon history. He reflects one of those early black pioneers who does come into the state in the 1840s before we really are able to establish the kind of racial rigidity that will be characteristic of later generations. He will come, he will be a businessman, he will have a grocery store, and eventually he will come into conflict with the territorial black exclusion law. Some of his competitors wanted to eliminate that competition that he represented, and after 1848 they brought a case against him saying that he should not be allowed to live in the state because blacks were officially banned from the state. Technically, Vanderpool had lived in Oregon before that law was passed, and so technically it didn't even apply to him. But sometimes in racial matters, certainly in these early years, technicalities were ignored when a larger agenda was being pursued. Jacob Vanderpool became the only documented case of a black person that was tried and excluded from Oregon under the 1848 territorial black exclusion law.
A group of young men gathered in a small town near the Alabama border of Tennessee. Because the Civil War was over, these men were filled with boredom and were in need of entertainment. The group met in secret and rode their horses through the town during the night. They held silent parades and covered their horses with white robes. These ghostly figures appeared to be the spirits of the Confederate dead who had died in the battle against the Union.
Initially, it's a social group. And since many of them had been members of college classes prior to the war, they had become familiar with the Greek fraternities. And the term Klux, they adapted from a fraternity, the Klux Adelphon. And Klux means in the Greek, circle. And then, of course, they added Klan to that idea. So initially in Tennessee, this small group of men created a local social organization. But it rapidly escalated as the Reconstruction process, the conflict between North and South, erupted into political issues and into social contests and the freeing of the former slaves.
In the spring of 1867, General Nathan Bedford Forrest was elected the Grand Wizard of the KKK.
He apparently, and there's some question about this, opposed some of the violence and intimidation associated with the Klan. But he is going to be its leader, and he will also be the person who effectively, after the federal trials, declares the Klan abolished.
Officially disbanded, it would not be the last time the South would see the invisible empire.
But it becomes other movements, other groups, the Knights of the White Camellia, local gun clubs, all of these that serve the same role in trying to preserve the South against what they perceive as the oppressions of the North and their fears then of racial conflict. And it becomes a very violent period of time. The most vicious period in American history as far as lynchings will be concerned. from the mid-1880s until 1915. More than 3,000 people would be lynched. After the mid-1880s, more black than white. In 1915, D.W. Griffith, noted cinematographer and director, will create a motion picture that is intended as a gigantic exposition of Southern history. It will be called The Birth of a Nation. He adapted it from that novel, and the Klan in that era is going to create another romantic vision then that actually spreads throughout the country. You see it in history textbooks too. The Klan is praised as the preserver of white womanhood, or the protector of white womanhood, the preserver of Southern culture. And between that novel and that motion picture, the idea is going to be a persistent one throughout the United States, that the Klan has this positive role to play.
In the fall of 1915, a man named William Joseph Simmons asked for and was granted a charter of the Ku Klux Klan in the state of Georgia.
He's also going to be a committed ideologue to Southern virtue, to the idea of the South. The second Klan, though, is going to build upon some of the themes of fraternal organization you found in that early Klan. It's also going to adopt some of the same names for its leaders as in the early Klan. You're going to see the titles like Dragon and Titan and Wizard appear again after 1915. And the new Klan we see is going to be one that emphasizes the burning cross, something not really identified with the original Klan.
So I think the Klan's people back in the 20s were feeling beset in some way or other. We're going to lose our nation. We're going to lose everything that's valuable about it. People are coming in from countries that don't speak our language. They drink things that we don't drink. They behave differently and have different customs and different beliefs. And if we don't oppose them and raise high this sort of banner of evangelical Christianity, Protestant Christianity, all will be lost.
There were a series of social events, economic events, political events, global events that had occurred in the 19-teens that made many white Americans very insecure and very nervous about the role that they were going to play in the country and in the country's future. World War I was one of those kind of tumultuous events that called into question many of the principles of American and kind of the democratic ideals. During World War I, thousands of African Americans fought in the conflict in Europe. They came home demanding more rights than they had been traditionally allotted here in the area. Some of the economics of the country changed. Many blacks moved out of the South because of economic depression there, because of mechanization of agriculture, because the northern industries in places like Pittsburgh and Detroit needed manual laborers, and blacks were a good source of labor for those growing factory experiences.
You know, just a few short years after World War I, there was a lot of hysteria about people being 100% American. And if you remember that, about at that time from history, the nervousness about speaking German, for instance. Many people with German names changed them to make them sound more English. Many school systems declined to teach German anymore. The language was, people who spoke German were, people viewed them with great suspicion because they weren't American enough. And it was not only the Germans, but people from the East, Chinese, Japanese, and so forth, that made the Anglo-Saxon Protestants of Oregon, as in other parts of the country, very nervous at the time.
Racial traditions were being challenged and overturned in many parts of the country that made many people who had been comfortable with the old way of doing racial matters very nervous about what the future of race in the country might portend.
And in Oregon, they simply want to keep a lid on radical and revolutionary ideas. And sometimes that becomes even a resistance to change of any kind. And this will be one of the contributors to the growth of the Klan. Because the Klan, with its 100% Americanism, will be able to build upon this anti-radical theme. That will be in addition to its racial and religious themes. The Imperial Wizard would be the head of the Klan, such as William Joseph Simmons, who was later replaced by, after an internal conflict in the Klan, within the Klan, replaced in the let's say about 1922, by Hiram Wesley Evans, who was a credit dentist from Dallas, Texas. He became then the leader of the Klan. But a campaign by early 1921 to spread the Klan throughout the United States. And professional organizers called Klux will go throughout the country, getting $4 from every $10 initiation fee. And this is what occurs then, especially from late 1920 into 1921, a rapid growth of the Klan from the South through the remainder of the country. The Lotties will be in Oregon, Ladies of the Invisible Empire. And they're going to be initially started by some men who are Klansmen and who then incorporate the Lotties. But within a year or two after their founding, the Lotties will become part of a much larger group nationally, the women of the Klan. And we typically think of the Klan as this male organization. It is a male organization, but they will have what could be called a Klan auxiliaries, including the women of the Klan, who have an independent agenda. And then also they will create, by 1923, a junior order of Klansmen, which is effectively what might be called a Klan version of the Demolay, identified with Masonic orders.
In Medford, of course, they were always looking for gold because, especially after the California Gold Rush, including Jacksonville, most famous, just a few miles out of Medford. And Jacksonville, even to this day, reflects some of that history, although it's now just a small village.
1921, a Klan organizer came from Atlanta, Georgia to Medford, a fellow named Luther Powell. And Luther said he was coming to stir up the people in Oregon to be loyal, that they would particularly be opposed to aliens, alien land ownership, and anyone who was opposed to public schools.
In less than 1/2 hour after signing up, the three of us were obligated into the Klan in a hotel room by a Kleagle who had just arrived that morning in the state. That afternoon, the three of us gathered a group of reliable men, and that night obligated 26 in the Masonic Hall, Medford, Oregon. Thus, the Ku Klux Klan started in Oregon. Former Medford Klansman, 1921.
The Klan comes into Oregon from California. But once it gets here, of course, the message that they have, the larger social issues that much of white America is dealing with that are true in other parts of the country are true in Oregon as well. And the Klan becomes not just a statement about racial issues. It rises to the level of a fraternal organization almost in Oregon. That is, if you are a white Protestant Oregon citizen, the Klan is a place where you can turn to for fellowship and friendship and commercial transactions and commercial support and political support. So it becomes much more than simply an organization that reflects a racial agenda. It becomes almost a fraternal organization in Oregon and one of the largest social organizations in the state.
The National Prohibition Act, also known as the Volstead Act, prohibited the sale, manufacture, transportation, or importation of alcoholic beverages in the country. This gave rise to the bootleggers, who became targets by the Klan. Local law enforcement officials who did not properly enforce the prohibition laws were under attack by the Invisible Empire. In the midst of prohibition, LeGrand police increased their vigilance upholding the law with the backing of the Klan. Bootleggers were targets of the police, and two black men, D. Rogers and Pearl Fagan, were high on the most wanted list. The Klan drew up a petition that was presented to LeGrand city officials concerning the Negroes on the North Side. The petition called for the prosecution of the undesirable element near the colored colony of the town. Justice was served when bootlegger D. Rogers was arrested and sent to jail. The Klan later called the petition drives a success. Meanwhile, the Medford City Council, in reaction to the recent activities by the Klan, passed an ordinance that banned wearing masks on the street. Burning crosses were seen on the hills east of town, and in nearby Ashland, the 4th of July celebration featured over 100 Klansmen dressed in costume, marching in the parade. A growing fear of the Klan spread northward up through the I-5 corridor to Eugene in Lane County, home of the University of Oregon. On Skinner's Butte overlooking the city, fiery crosses were seen by the residents of Eugene.
In Eugene, a community of several thousand residents, the Klan made its influence in a slightly different way. Different social level in some respects. There were a number of young men who joined the Klan who were rising businessmen in opposition to the older economic elite, perhaps. There were also some students from the University of Oregon who were members of the Klan. The exalted Cyclops, or leader of the local Klan in Eugene, was also the head of the Latin department of the University of Oregon. In 1924, a major parade and state assembly, also at the fairgrounds in Eugene, and several thousand people in attendance.
Further north in the Willamette Valley, the Klan was establishing itself in Salem, the state's capital.
Klan once held a rally at the state fairgrounds in Salem. This was a major rally with several hundred initiates and visitors from all over the western part of the state in particular.
While the KKK was establishing itself in the Willamette Valley, the smaller communities on the coast were not ignored. Against the backdrop of Oregon's pristine coastline and beaches, claverns were being established up and down Highway 101.
Tillamook hardly figured it had a shallow bay, but it wasn't suitable for a port of entry for ocean ships, and a few did stop there. One or two were wrecked there.
The native white population in Tillamook County was 81% of the total residents in 1910. Less than 20 Asians and only one African American were known to live in the county.
In Tillamook, for example, the local motto of the county was cheese, trees, and ocean breeze. But I was told by a former member of the Klan that you could add to that and no Chinese. And I found that in comparing the list of members with local occupations, you would find a cross-section of the community. And for a period of about 4 years, virtually every public office in Tillamook was filled by Klansmen.
LeGrand, Oregon was host to 7,000 people during the 1920s. It served as the commercial and highway headquarters of Eastern Oregon, featuring manufacturing companies, lumber mills, and a distribution center for livestock and agricultural products. LeGrand hosted a chapter of the Klan whose success was linked to its own history and colorful past.
Communities as remote as Condon, as far east side as Baker, all of these will have clans.
About 50 members of the Ku Klux Klan from Wasco County put on a street parade and initiation in town on Monday evening. While the weather was very unsettled and cold, a few of the local members of the Invisible Empire, clad in their regalia, joined in the parade and initiation ceremony. By actual count, 54 robed members took part in the parade. During the day, 2 long trenches in the form of a cross on a hillside east of town had been filled with sawdust and crude oil. After dark, this was set on fire and formed part of a spectacular program. Hood River newspaper reporter, 1924.
In the Dalles, they did not permit masks. And so these Klan members simply strode down the boulevard in their parade unmasked and were recognized by the local citizens. But this particular organization had already been recognized because they had typically held a 4th of July celebration in the little community of Duffer, just outside the Dalles, where they had softball games and picnics on July 4. Well, this idea of a cross-section of the community is one that in the past always bumped against the stereotype of the Klan as Southern, redneck, and violent. But what we've discovered in Oregon in particular, and in some other states as well, is this widespread appeal of the Klan.
On December 22, 1921, 6,000 people filled the Municipal Auditorium in Portland, Oregon, to hear lectures presented by the Invisible Empire. One of the speakers was R.H. Sawyer, one of the top leaders of the Portland Klan.
It is my pleasure to be in this beautiful city of roses and a privilege to address an audience of real Americans. It may interest you to know that the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan like Portland, and that we come not simply for a brief visit, but to be enrolled among the permanent organizations of your city. The day will come when the world will recognize and acknowledge that it was a most distinguished honor to have occupied even the humblest position under such a leader as ours, and in such an organization as represented by these thousands of Portland's best citizens.
The primary challenge in Oregon, unlike in many other parts of the country, was not a racial challenge, but a religious challenge, a cultural challenge. The primary target of the Klan in Oregon became the Catholic Church, the Church of the Pope. And supposedly the Pope was going to exercise control over his followers in this country, and that was going to be a challenge to the vision of Americanism that many of the Klan followers had adopted.
And the Klan, in developing its themes of Protestantism, had 2 reasons. One, and this is typical of the Klan attitudes, they wanted to purge the public schools of Catholic teachers when they could. They also wished to introduce the King James Version of the Bible into the public school to make it a part of the curriculum.
Klan lectures were very effective in the Invisible Empire's religious bigotry agenda. The most devastating lecturer was the Reverend V.K. Allison.
V.K. Allison was presumably a Lebanon pastor of one of the Protestant churches. And giving lectures was a rather common phenomenon at the time. You have the Chautauqua lectures, for example, and it was for the people. Again, we didn't have TV, and so they were always an attraction.
The Reverend Allison appeared at the public school auditorium in Silverton, where he claimed Catholic girls were forced to go into convents, that Catholics are not 100% American, and Pope Leo XIII was The popest pope that ever poped and is still poping.
For example, in Silverton, he said that girls were forced to join the convents. And from Silverton, those people could see the abbey and the convent down below. And they would have, I recall my roots in Mount Angel, the very early stories of a tunnel that they had presumably constructed between the monastery and the convent. In Newburgh, Allison railed about the domination of the Pope going to take over the United States. And in Marshfield, he said the hierarchy of the Catholic Church is not going to run this country.
So the anti-Catholic sentiment is not just a product of the Klan. The Klan simply took advantage of what already existed and added to it.
Lectures were not the only promotional methods the Portland Klan utilized. Many Klansmen were seen in full regalia driving through the city streets in their automobiles. An outdoor initiation was part of the Rose Carnival, and crosses were seen burning at Mount Tabor.
Luther I. Powell, who had organized the Klan in Medford, was called to Portland because Bragg Calloway, the organizer there, had not been as successful as the Klan had hoped. So Powell came in, was able to create a local Klan in Portland, and a very influential one. Powell is going to choose as his, effectively chooses his local leader. The first exalted cyclops of the Portland Klan will be Frederick L. Gifford.
Members of Portland's Ku Klux Klan came from the Portland Police and Fire Departments. The police department was often accused of not enforcing the laws to their fullest, and John E. Young, the chief of the fire department and Klan member, was given the task of removing Catholic employees of the department. The Klan had their allies with many local businesses, both big and small, known and lesser known. Through their business connections, the Klan now had a power base to exert their political agendas. The Klan's ambition was to have representation in the highest political office in the state. Through his actions, Gifford's plans and ambitions enabled him to influence political activity in the entire state of Oregon for the next 2 years. Gifford announced his intent to control both houses of the state legislature, including the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. Controlling the city of Portland was first on Gifford's political agenda. The Klan's political ambitions during the primary elections of 1922 included inducting several legislators into the group in the state's capital city of Salem. Fred L. Gifford himself conducted the ceremony at a local hotel.
1922 was for the Republican Party, a critical election year. The Republicans have dominated Oregon politics for many years. But in 1922, Olcott is not the most popular Republican. And he's going to find that he's challenged in the primary by Charles Hall of Coos Bay. And Hall will receive the support of what is now this newly formed Klan movement in by 1922. And Hall will also adopt a theme, one idea that has surfaced, because it will be an initiative measure in 1922, is the abolition of all private and parochial schools in the state of Oregon, the Oregon Compulsory School Bill.
Many Protestant churches voiced opposition to the school bill, joined by the Oregon Defense League and the Oregon Tax League. In addition, a group of 200 lawyers listed their names in the Oregonian as against the measure. When Ben Olcott defeated Charles Hall in the primary, Hall's supporters called for a recount of the votes. Olcott won the primary when voter fraud was discovered favoring Hall's election. Staying with the Klan's anti-Catholic sentiments, Charles Hall's supporters claimed Catholics had influenced the primary vote tally in Mount Angel and St. Paul, towns that were predominantly Roman Catholic.
And now suddenly Olcott, by early 1922, is faced with this problem of not only a revived Klan, but a politically influential Klan in the state.
Dangerous forces are insidiously gaining a foothold in Oregon. In the guise of a secret society, parading under the name of the Ku Klux Klan, these forces are endeavoring to usurp the reign of government, are stirring up fanaticism, race hatred, religious prejudice. Assaults have been committed in various counties of the state by unknown masked outlaws, the odium of which has been reflected on the Ku Klux Klan. Their vile acts demonstrate that the name of the organization may be used for evil purposes, and that from the nature of its activities, it has the moral effect of causing unthinking and misguided persons to enter into unlawful conspiracies and to perpetrate unlawful deeds. Governor Ben W. Alcott, May 15, 1922.
So Pierce is going to be coming into that election with not exactly a political organization, but with a lot of support based upon grassroots appeal on tax issues, upon Alcott's inability to calm the political scene in the aftermath of World War I.
On November 7th, Oregon had elected a new governor, Walter M. Pierce, who won by 31,000 votes. Multnomah County had sent a predominantly Klan delegation to the state capitol. The Eastern Oregon Klan was also represented, with their delegate winning the 2nd Congressional District.
A Democratic school teacher from Eastern Oregon from Pendleton named Walter Pierce ran and was elected with Klan support.
The tally of votes also signaled the passing of the compulsory school bill. 1/2 of registered voters were anti-parochial and anti-Catholic. Nearly 135,000 non-Catholic voters supported the measure or avoided voting on it. The Oregon Ku Klux Klan's political ambition had paid off in the elections of 1922. Joyful Klansmen declared the 1923 session as the start of the 100% Americanism in Oregon.
Well, the Klan initially was extremely happy with Pierce because he sounded as if he would do many things for them, including giving partisan offices to Klansmen.
Newly elected Governor Pierce was constantly visited and lobbied by members of the Klan who sought state jobs and other political positions. The Klan legislature of 1923 included 30 members of the Senate, of which only 2 were born outside of the United States. The House had a similar number of immigrants, and the Speaker of the House was K.K. Kublai.
He was also given an honorary membership in the Klan because of his initials, KKK. So he had a group of people who were not necessarily Klansmen, but who often aligned with Kublai's goals and those of the Klan. And they were referred to sometimes as the Kublai Klan.
The Catholic Church, fully aware of the anti-Catholic stance of the Klan, instructed the Knights of Columbus to keep in touch with the affairs of the state legislature affecting the Roman Catholic Church.
In the 1923 legislature, there were a number of themes that seemed to surface. The school bill was an initiative measure, so it was already taken care of by a vote of the people. But the advocates of a law to block Japanese ownership of land were able to push through an alien land law that conceivably was aimed at any alien, non-citizen, but was in particular aimed at the Japanese Americans, who numbered about 5,000 in the state at that time.
When the alien land law of 1923 was passed, there actually was a period, I believe, of about 3 months where before the law went into effect. And so in fact, many Japanese, including Masuo Yasui, who was a leading citizen in Hood River, helped Issei to purchase property. And then after the law went into effect, Issei found another loophole. Sometimes Caucasian friends would purchase property for them in their names. And if that didn't work, many of them had children at that time who were born as Americans. They were second generation Japanese or Nisei. And so many Issei purchased property in the names of their Nisei sons and daughters, and that was legal.
Sometimes people in this generation, because we think it should be the way that government operates, government should be neutral on racial matters. Government should be neutral when you're making decisions that might be reflected in some kind of racial realities. That's what we think should be the case and would like to have be the case in our generation. And because we're so committed to that idea, we don't understand the degree to which it was not true, not characteristic of earlier generations of American life.
There is something about a graveyard that appeals to half-baked minds. It still inspires awe and trepidation, especially at night, among the ignorant. Capital Journal.
In the period of 1920 to 1925, the press on this whole issue was rather silent. The main newspapers did not take a stand against the Klan for a long time. They did not take a stand on the compulsory education bill.
The Newspaper Association in the state tried to adopt a style of neutrality. They did not necessarily oppose the Klan. They did not necessarily support it. They just wanted to leave it.
Notably in Salem, the Capital Journal, and one man, Harry Crane, was very much alert on this and early on opposed the Klan. But the silence of major newspapers on these issues is what allowed this to get as far as it went.
The lack of editorial content opposing the Klan in Oregon's newspapers was noticed outside the state. The Seattle Post-Intelligence noted that Oregon was the only northern state which allowed the Klan to take over the state's affairs. This resulted in both immigrants and manufacturing companies avoiding establishing themselves in Oregon. Despite the volume of anti-Catholic legislation introduced into the Senate, many of those in the House opposed the Klan's agenda, and several members ended their support of Cap Kublai.
Well, in some communities, the Klan never died until the early to mid-1930s. In Tillamook, for example, a few members kept meeting. Cottage Grove, a few members met into the 1930s. They changed into more of a fraternal group, much less political, and yet they were going against the tide because thousands of their former members had left by the late 1920s. In fact, they were beginning to leave the Klan by 1924, 25. Powell even tried to come back, but eventually ended up helping to organize the Klan in the state of Washington and also in Alaska. Callaway was a Texan, and as best we know, after his failure in Portland as an organizer, just returned to the Texas area, the Southwest, and was trying to organize there. But Callaway never had the appeal that Powell had.
One is, poor as the settlers were that came to Oregon, when the Great Depression came along, they sunk even lower in economic success and all that. And then came the Dust Bowl and the phenomenon of the failure of organized agriculture in the Middle Western states of the United States. Many of them came to the West Coast. And when they got here, they were still poor, and they were looking for solutions. And the Klan had some ideas. They were anti-foreign. The Klan was anti-foreigners. But if you were a Protestant European, that was all right.
Well, I think it is true that behind every disadvantage, that you experience, there is a hidden advantage. And I think that was particularly true as a result of this very unhappy period of Oregon history, that the church learned a lot from it, I think. One would be that you have to be very careful that lurking within human nature is always a tendency to be critical of somebody else. And even though you think you may have smoothed all the waters, some little incident comes up and that surfaces again. Mostly I think it shows, this whole period shows, that you need an intelligent, articulate, informed electorate. If you don't have that, then almost anything can take place if you get some person who has their own particular agenda and their own little objective that they are going to push through.
We are a country of immigrants. If we were to look at pure nativists, we would all be studying the Native Americans. So most of us are immigrants or come from families of immigrants in this country. We're built on a democracy. We have a Bill of Rights. We really say that we cherish the value and the needs and the rights of all citizens. That's been tested. There are a number of incidents where the rights of our citizens have been precarious. Understanding the KKK can be one example of helping us to understand what went wrong and what we need to do to make a difference. Someone said a long time ago that by learning the past and by learning the mistakes that we've made, we can learn to make change, and I really believe that's important.
The only way that you can understand the Oregon of the 21st century is to have some knowledge and some appreciation for the role that our public policies of the past around racial issues had on Oregon as it became a state and in the generations that followed in early statehood and as we move towards the 20th century. I think the mistake that many people make when they try to understand our present racial realities and look to our past racial histories is they approach all of those issues from the vantage point of racism being a reflection of private prejudice, of private hostility of individuals of one race towards individuals of another. But the real impact of our racial history has not been reflected in the dynamics of private prejudice, which have certainly been there and continue to be there in a significant degree, but it's the public policy of race that has had the greatest impact around the racial histories and legacies that have carried through to our generation. In Oregon, in the pioneer generation, the only people who could receive free land under homesteading were white Americans. You give all the land to one group based on a racial formula that has an impact on the economics and the politics and the racial realities of that state from that point on. If I had to say, there is one thing about our need to understand our racial history, our racial past, it's the need to understand that public policy around racial issues has been the driving force in American history, and the black exclusion laws that were adopted in Oregon in the pioneer generation are a perfect example, a clear case where we can witness that and we can see the kind of impact that those race-based public policies had on the course of American history.